Good morning, everyone. In today's class, we shall study the database application development. So far, we have discussed the database, its commands, how to create a table, modify the data, or modify the structure of a table, drop the table. So, all those things we have studied with specific to Oracle database. And all these activities we performed directly on the database side. So we opened the database command window and we fed the commands. But in reality, so it is not directly on the database that the users will be working on. The end users will be working on the user interface, not on the backend. So there should be a connectivity between the user interface, what we call as front end, and the database. So we have written many laboratory programs in C or Java. Suppose if we want to connect to database from those programs, how we can do it? So if we are able to connect to the database and pass those commands, whatever we um, typed in the console of Oracle in the program itself. So we'll pass the commands as a string, as a parameter, as a function call to the database. So if we are able to pass those commands from a Java program or C++, C Sharp, C, PHP, Python, from all those languages, just like a function call, we'll pass the command as a string. Then the commands get executed on the database, and if at all there has to be a result to be returned, that will be returned from the database to the program. So incorporating this in an application, so this becomes the database application. So we will be writing the commands in our programming language itself, and we'll connect the programming language with the database through some mechanisms. So what are those we shall discuss. So during our discussion on database application development, so we will study how to connect the application programs to the database, how applications can manipulate the data at the database, or how we can retrieve the data. So at this time, how we can iterate over the result returned by the database. So along with that, we will also study a specific connectivity of Java with a database. So that JDBC. So Java database connectivity. Then we will also study how SQL and storage procedures can be used. So before that, why we need to access a database from a programming language? So SQL is a direct query language, but still it has a limitations. So whenever we are using the application, suppose we are creating an account on a social media platform, any of the websites. So let us consider Facebook. So we are creating an account. So whenever we are creating an account, we need to enter our details in a sign up page. So in the sign up page, we will provide our email ID, mobile number, and a password, everything, and click on sign in button. So when we perform that action, that is clicking on the sign in button or sign up button, so what happens is in their database, somewhere in the users table, a row is inserted. with our email ID and whatever mobile number we have entered. So automatically when I click the sign up button, that row has to be inserted. So we cannot wait for employees of a Facebook to sit at the database console and type the insert command. So it is not so. So it has to happen automatically. Or whenever if I want to sign in, so I'll enter the email ID and password and just click on the sign in button. So what happens is at the back end in the database, it will compare the email ID and password whether it belongs to a legitimate user ID. So if the email ID is existing, then it will verify whether the password entered is present or not in the database. So if both of them match for a particular row, then automatically it will allow to enter into the home page. So this query, again, checking whether the username and password is correct, that also has to happen automatically, which means we need a mechanism from the applications to interact with the database. So all those SQL commands, so we can directly pass and connect to the database via programming languages. So with the use of programming languages, so we can perform the complex computational processing of data. So SQL has its own limitations. So far we have studied the SQL commands. So we cannot completely do all sorts of computations in SQL itself. So sometimes we have to extract the data from a table, put them in the arrays of a programming language, and then on those arrays we have to perform the calculations or computations. And again, programming languages are required for specialized user interface. So user interface means nothing but just like our sign up page where you will have the text box, text area, radio button, then combo boxes, date picker, drop downs. So all those things. So combined together, it is called as a user interface. So access to more than one database at the same time is also possible if we use the programming languages. So these are the few necessities for using the or accessing the database via programming language. So and again, so SQL commands can be called from a host language. From almost all the languages we can perform or connect to a database. So SQL statements can refer to host variables. So for example, if I want to extract details of a particular student, so what I will pass the command as select star from student where USN is equal to some value. So instead of giving a value, I can place a variable over there of a particular maybe Java variable. So I will declare a string USN is equal to some value, or I will read at the runtime. That variable I can pass over there. And before passing any sort of commands to the database, we must first connect to the database. So again, this connect means it is also a function call. So just like how we open and close the files, here also we have to call the connect and close commands in order to connect to the database. So or it is just like a function call. So some predefined function calls has to be done before passing the commands. So SQL in application code. So impedance mismatch. So SQL relations are a multi-set of records with um, no priori bound on number of records. No such data structure exists traditionally in procedural programming language to hold all those records. So for example, in the database, if I want to extract all the student details, so from the programming side, I will not be knowing how many records are present or how many rows are present, whether it is 1000, 2000, 5000. So we will not know. If I don't know that particular value, I cannot create an array in some traditional languages. Because in the programming languages, while creating an array, we have to declare its size. So some programs it is not possible. Whereas in some programming languages, dynamic arrays are allowed. So where there is no boundary for an array at the time of its declaration and its size can be increased during the runtime. So for this specific purpose, so there is one thing called as cursor facility has been provided. So we can declare a cursor on any relation or any SQL query. Once a cursor is declared, we can open it and extract one row at a time. So we'll extract one row, complete its processing, then extract the next row. Or using this concept of cursor, we can move from one row to another row, or we can iterate in the backward direction also. So we can also go to previous row also. So once processing is complete, we can close the cursor. So thus cursor essentially allows us to retrieve the rows in a table by positioning the cursor at a particular row, and then we can read its contents. So initially cursor will be at the first row. So it is desirable to have the features such as they are easy to use, so conform to the standards of existing programming language, so database query language and development environments. So whatever mechanism is used in order to extract the data, they must comply with the programming language as well as with the query languages. So one of the most important feature whenever we are extracting the data is the interoperability. So interoperability is the ability to use the common interface in different database systems and on a different operating systems. So if I develop a application today and tomorrow if we change the database from Oracle, if we move on to MySQL or some other database, that compatibility or interoperability should be there. So whatever the user interface that we're working on Oracle should also work, is expected to work with MySQL also. Or if the database is running currently on a Windows platform, if we shift it to a Unix or Linux platforms, there also the application should work. So that concept we call it as interoperability. So whenever we are uh, designing connectivity between an application and the database, so interoperability should be provided. So there will be some vendor specific solutions. So for example, so we have some proprietary database packages like Oracle or PL1 language, which supports the execution of SQL queries. So the mechanism in which Oracle is designed and the other DBMS packages like Sybase or MySQL are designed, they may be different. So whatever the connectivity we are doing, that should be vendor specific. So there are few advantages of using vendor specific. So many Oracle specific features are not common in other systems, and performance may be optimized in some of the database systems. So again, the disadvantage of using the vendor specific solution is, so whenever we change the database, the application also needs modification. So the application programmer must depend upon the vendor for application development environment. So it may not be possible to use in all the platforms also. So vendor independent solutions are also possible on SQL. So there are three basic strategies which may be considered. So one is embed SQL in the host language. So that is embedded SQL. So embedded SQL means, so in the language in which we are writing a application, in that one, that itself will be having the database. So that is embedded SQL. Or we can have SQL modules, SQL call level interfaces. So these can be considered. So we shall discuss each one of them. So embedded SQL. So in this particular approach, we embed the SQL in the host language itself. So a preprocessor will be there that will convert the SQL statement into a special API call. Then a regular compiler is used to compile the rest of the code. So in this mechanism, so SQL statements must be clearly marked so that a preprocessor can deal with them before invoking the compiler of the host language. So any host language variables used to pass arguments into SQL command must be declared in SQL. So in particular, some special host language variables must be declared in SQL. So however, before using this embedded SQL, there will be two complications. So first is the data type recognized by SQL may not be recognized by the host language, or the reverse also. So this mismatch is typically addressed by casting the data values appropriately before passing them are to the SQL command. So the second issue is SQL being the set oriented language, and it has to be addressed using cursors. So in later we shall discuss how embedded SQL can be used in C programming languages. So here are the few constructs we have. In order to connect to the database, so we must execute the command, that is exec sql connect. So this will connect to the database. If you want to declare a variable, then we can write exec sql begin declare section, and it has to be ended with end command. So and all the SQL statements, so we can write it as exec SQL followed by the statement. So these are the language constructs which are used in embedded SQL. So a complete declaration section would look like this: exec SQL begin. It has to be matched with a corresponding end declaration section, and here inside this we can declare the variables. So character, cname 20, SID, rating, age, like this. So two special error variables will be there. So that is the SQL code and the SQL short. So SQL code is the one which return some negative value when an error arises. And SQL state, it is associated with some predefined values Again, there will be some predefined error conditions, so which can be represented in a SQL state. So again, both are used to give some hint about the execution of the SQL commands. So SQL state, it is 6 characters code will be there for common errors. So next is the cursors. So the problem of embedding SQL statement in host language is that an impedance mismatch which we studied, right? Because the result returned by the SQL is a set and we don't know how many values will be there. For that purpose, we can declare a cursor on a query result, and then we can open the cursor and repeatedly fetch one tuple at a time. And after extracting one tuple, the cursor automatically move to the next tuple. So we can also use the special order by clause in the query so that the result whatever we process, that will be in order. So just like ordering all the student names based on the USN. So fields in order by class must not appear in the select class, but still that can be done. So order by class which orders the tuples is only allowed in the context of a cursor. So we can also modify and delete tuples pointed by the cursor. So cursor that gets a name of a sailor who have reserved a red boat in the alphabetical order. So this is the query. For example, this query we are considering where we will be extracting the name of a sailor who has reserved a red boat. So our execution statement in an embedded SQL will be like this: exec SQL declare, this is the name sinfo, cursor for, then followed by the SQL statement. So whatever we have written after the first line, so this we have already studied, it is just basic SQL. But the command here is exec SQL declare, sinfo is the name of the cursor, keyword cursor for this particular query. So select name of the sailor from sailors, boat reserves. So these are the tables, they are joined, and then we are extracting its name. Note that here it is illegal to replace s dot s name by s dot sid because we have a order by clause, but in some dbms packages it is allowed. So in some dbms packages, so we can write a few attributes in the order by clause and the same can be used in select clause also, but in embedded SQL it is not allowed. So we can add SID to select class and replace the sname by SID in the order by class, but that is not allowed in uh, embedded SQL. So it has its own restrictions. So what can be used in order by class? Can the same be used in select class? So there is a difference across the languages. So embedding SQL in a C language. So first we are declaring a variable that is SQL state of 6. Then SQL begin declare statement. So we will be declaring the variables, that is the S name, minimum rating, age, that is a declaration of variables. Then we are generating a random rating, right? So then we are executing one command, that is select name of the sailor, age from the sailor's table where his rating is greater than the randomly generated variable ordered by S name. So here what happens is, instead of assigning a minimum rating value, we are randomly assigning it in a program. Otherwise we can directly specify the value 5 over here, because this is a programming variable. Here the C programming variable can be used in a query, but that should be prefixed with a colon like this, colon C underscore min rating. So what happens when we specify like this, when this particular SQL command is compiled, this colon C underscore min rating, that will be replaced by the value of this variable, let us say 5. So it becomes S dot rating greater than 5. So just like this, each time when we run this query, we can change the value of min rating and execute the same command. So we can use the C programming variables in a SQL query, but with a prefix of colon. Then, so once this query is executed, we will be getting the result. So in order to print that result, so we must add few more commands, that is do while loop. So in the do while loop, again we are extracting exec sql fetch sinfo into sname and age. So which means we are extracting, if you observe in the select statement, name and age. So when we extract the first row, we must place the name and age in some variable. So in C programming variable. So what we do is, the command will be fetch sinfo. Sinfo is the name of the cursor, so which we have declared over here. One row will be extracted and the values will be placed in C underscore sname variable, and age will be placed in C underscore age. So now these two C programming variables will hold the name and age of the first row that is written by the query. And then we can print it in a normal printf statement. So printf percentage s is percentage d years old, so name will be printed here. So this particular person is this much years old. So that printf statement gets executed and it is printed on the C console. While SQL state not equal to 0 2000. So this 2000 is the a specific value which indicates that we are we have completed extraction of all the rows, or till we reach this state where it says there are no more rows in the cursor. So once we print all the values, so we can execute the SQL close sinfo, which means here we are closing the cursor. So this is embedding SQL in C programming language. So embedding means in the program itself we are writing the code. So embedding of SQL in any language, so it looks complex, the command seems like so, but having a API calls will be much more easier compared to embedding the SQL in the host language itself. So next way of uh, doing or connecting to database is the dynamic SQL. So dynamic SQL means, so SQL query strings are not always known at the compile time. So we doesn't bother about the query, and we'll allow the construction of SQL statements on the fly. So for example, if you observe here, a character string we are declaring, that is delete from sailors where rating greater than 5, right? So we have a query like this. Then what we do is, exec SQL prepare ready to go from this particular string. So ready to go is the name of the query. So and this we call it as a prepare statement. So prepare statement means before executing it, we are preparing the command. So from which string? Which from SQL string. So this SQL string is a programming variable. So and programming variables value can change at any time during the course of execution. So which means at the compilation time we will not know what command it is. Only when the statements are executed on the fly, then only we will get to know what command we will be running on a SQL. Whereas in the previous case, so before compilation only in embedded SQL everything would have been known. So after this preparing the statement, so we can execute it using the statement exec SQL execute this particular name of the statement that is ready to go. That is the same name whatever we have used over here. So there are some disadvantage of using the dynamic SQL. So it is a real hard to debug the pre-processed programs. The use of program development environment is compromised substantially. The preprocessor must be a vendor and platform specific. So if we are using the dynamic SQL as well as the embedded SQL, so we are writing the database connectivity code in the program itself. So if anything goes wrong with the program, it is hard for the programmers to debug where the error is. So the separation of the database code and our normal programming code is a must. And if we are using the embedded and dynamic SQL, so for each type of vendor and platform, we need a particular code. For that purpose, so the next optional we have is the SQL modules. So in the modules approach, we will be invoking the SQL via library of procedures rather than a pre-processing. So these are having a specialized standard interfaces, that is some procedures and objects will be present. So we can pass a SQL string from a language, and also we can extract a result set in a language friendly way. So these are again the Dbms neutral commands can be used. So a driver is utilized here. All the calls to the Dbms will pass through this particular driver, and this driver traps the call and translate them into Dbms specific code. And here in these SQL modules, the database can reside anywhere in the network. So the example module based code include the Java API. So it is just one example for this Java language. Similarly, we have for all other programming languages. So that is provided by Sun Microsystem, that is JDBC. So JDBC stands for Java Database Connectivity. So all the codes that are required to connect to the database, it is present in a package called as SQL package. If you want to use it in our language, so we have to import this package. So we can have import java.sql in the beginning of our Java program. So how it is done, so we shall discuss. So before that, there are few advantages of using this SQL module over the embedded. So that is there will be a clear distinction between SQL from host programming language. So debugging becomes more easier because there is no preprocessor. But still there is some disadvantage. The disadvantage is libraries. So again, these programming libraries are specific to the programming language and the environment, and thus portability is compromised greatly. So if we change the programming language, then libraries must be changed. If we change the database, again library has to be changed. But today we have a library for almost all the programming languages to almost all the database packages. So JDBC architecture, so that is Java database connectivity. So it has its own architecture. So we shall stop here for today's class. So you can enter the attendance in your chat. So we'll continue with JDBC architecture in our next class.